whatever you want or whoever you want on your team, you need to be that. When you think of your rehearsal time, be like real intentional about not calling that practice. Practice is what we do on our own. You know, an audition process allows you to say no instead of removing somebody from the team.
Okay, well, what if I have to tell someone no? Like, I don't want it to feel like American Idol or The Voice or whatever, like, you're cut.
Hey, I'm Andrea Olson. I've been leading worship and training worship leaders for nearly 20 years, and my mission is to support worship leaders just like you in volunteer-supported ministries because I know what it's like. I've been there. It's amazing, but you have a big job, and sometimes you might feel a little bit alone. But I'm here to remind you that you aren't. We'll cover spiritual and leadership growth, practical resources, and get encouragement from other worship leaders from all over the world. I truly want to see you lead from the overflow, not the overwhelm. So grab a cup of tea or coffee and join me. Welcome to the Overflow Worship Podcast.
Well, I love that I get to talk to people from all over the place. I get to meet new friends along the way. And our guest today, we actually met in the last couple of months. I was a guest on his podcast, and we had such a great conversation. And I just loved hearing about what he's doing for worship leaders and his heart for ministry. And so I was like, we got to continue this conversation on the Overflow Worship Podcast. So Gary Durbin is here with me today, and he is an author, and a worship leader, a husband, and a dad, and he's going to tell you more about that. But I just want to say, Gary, thank you so much for being here today. Welcome to the Overflow Worship Podcast.
Oh, thanks, Andrea. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So why don't we kick it off? Just tell everybody a little bit about you.
Wow. Well, I've been in ministry for 22 years in the local church. All of those years, my title has basically been worship leader. So I tell people I handle the music and the media side of things. So I've done all the worship leading things, and also I have done a lot of video editing and graphics and social media, website, whatever the church needs me to do in the media department. And so I've been doing that for quite a while now, and I'm also a husband to my wife Jenny, and we actually are newlyweds. So we consider ourselves newlyweds. We just hit our 2-year anniversary, so we've been married for the last 2 years. But then I also have my awesome kids, my 2 kids. My son is 20. He's an adult now, and I think he'll be hitting the marriage thing pretty soon as well, so that's exciting. But then I also have a 16-year-old daughter who is just on the cusp of getting her driver's license, and we're excited about that. That's going to be fun. But I live in Stowe, Ohio, or actually I should say I just moved to Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. My church is in Stowe, which is about 30 to 40 minutes south of Cleveland. So that Akron area is the best way to describe it. So LeBron James country.
Okay, amazing. That's awesome. Well, my husband and I have 3 girls, and we are not to the driving stage yet, but our oldest is 13. And so I'm like imagining it's coming fast. So
yeah, fast is the word. Yes.
Yeah, for sure. So I would love for us to take a little bit of time and talk about what it means to have a healthy worship team. At the Overflow Worship Podcast, we talk about worship culture and healthy team culture and what that looks like. But you've actually written some books, and you have a podcast, More Than a Worship Leader podcast. And I just would love for us to start with, hey, when you think about healthy teams, where do you start? Where does that conversation begin for you?
Well, I did a teaching podcast, and they can go on my podcast and listen to it more in depth. But I did a teaching podcast, and I just taught a workshop at Cedarville University about this topic. And so I kind of lay out four areas when it comes to building a healthy worship team. And the way I define it is it's a group of people who are united under Christ and the vision of your local church, serving with excitement and joy. So if you hit that definition with your worship team, if you walk away from a rehearsal or from a Sunday and you see those descriptors, you're healthy. You're doing very well.
Yeah.
But there's 4 areas that I kind of hit when I think of a healthy worship team in order to get there. The first thing is attracting. So there's the idea of attracting. This was a quote from Darlene Check I read in her book years ago. It basically says, you attract who you are.
Yeah.
So if you want whatever you want or whoever you want on your team, you need to be that.
Yeah.
And so attracting is a big part of it. And in that attracting, there's the audition process. And I'm very clear and challenging to worship leaders, like, don't skip that part when you're building your team. It's okay to audition, and that you're not being a jerk, and it's okay. An audition process allows you to say no initially, instead of removing somebody from the team, and
Right.
that's a lot easier to say no early. But it also gives you a chance to find potential people you feel like that can be on the team and grow into it. So there's all kinds of good things with that. So attracting is the first part, and then the second part would be training, and this is something that I am growing in as a worship leader still, like trying to find my footing on that. And I think especially as your team grows, I have the largest worship team I have now that I've ever had, and so just trying to figure out the best way to train our team in an ongoing way is that's something that I've had to recalibrate as our team has grown.
Yeah.
But a big thing that I mentioned in my book, More Than a Band, that you can take your team through when it comes to training is to make sure to define things properly. So when you think of your rehearsal time, be like real intentional about not calling that practice. Make sure to call it rehearsal, and make sure to emphasize that practice is what we do on our own, and rehearsal is what we do. Yeah, rehearsal is what we do when we come together, and sound check is checking the sound. So it's really defining those things and training your team to be ready for each of those things. And then the other thing we've done with training is just making sure we're able to pour into our musicians and vocalists, and we've done that in different ways. Right now, we actually are redoing that, and we're going to launch something different next year. But in the past, we've done worship team parties, like a couple times a year, where we've done like workshops, things like that. That's been fun. And then the newest thing that has been a big success for our team is something we just innovated last year called worship team checkups. And so what we've done is we have designated one time a year for me to meet with each team member individually, one-on-one, for about 15 minutes. And it's a checkup. It's just allowing me to kind of focus on them. And the reason we're doing that is our team, we have about 30 plus in our rotation on the stage team. And so it allows me to take some time with these people that serve like once a month, and to let them know how they're doing, if there's anything they can improve in or encourage them. And it gives them a chance to talk to me too, like if they have any thoughts. Yeah. So that's the second thing. I'm talking a lot. Is there anything you want to add to any of that?
No, I mean, I love it. I think it's, when you talked about attracting, I think that's so powerful. And it's such a great reminder for us as leaders, because oftentimes we forget to look inward. If we're having like, oh, my team's not growing, or there's challenges within my team. Yes, there's external contributing factors, but we do have to look inward at ourselves and be honest about that. And so I think that's really powerful. One question I did want to ask you, because you talked about like attracting the right kind of team members and then auditioning them. I get asked the question all the time, and I bet you do too, of, okay, well, what if I have to tell someone no? Like, I don't want it to feel like American Idol or The Voice or whatever, like you're cut. But at the same time, we do have to be honest with them. And so what are some tips that you give people when they ask you that question of like, okay, so I attracted a great person, but they don't have the musical skill that's needed to be on the platform. How do I tell them that?
Well, I think the first step as a worship leader is you have to remove the guilt when it comes to that. And I always point to Psalm 33 that it really hits clearly the idea of playing skillfully, and that
Yeah.
that's a value to God. And honestly, if we're honest, it's a value to everyone. I mean,
Yeah.
nobody walks around and says, I'd like to hear some subpar music right now. And so when it comes to our churches, to look at your church and look at your context and say, what is the bar here? And let's hit that bar and let's focus on raising it musically. There's nothing wrong with that. So remove the
Yeah.
guilt.
Yeah.
But as far as like saying no, obviously you want to handle that gently. You want to handle it clearly. So we don't want to play games with people. We don't want to give people false hope. So there's sometimes
Yeah.
where I look at someone and I say, man, I'm on the fence here. So I'll say it's not a yes, but it's not a no. And I'm willing to bring you back in for another audition later if you'll work on this.
Sure.
Then there are people that it's like it's a no. It's just they're just not a fit, and I don't want to give them false hope and mess with their
Yeah.
emotions. So just
Yeah.
kind of figuring out where, being honest with yourself and going, will this person, do I have to talk myself out of putting this person on the team, or do I have to talk myself into it? And that's a good indicator too.
Absolutely. So you talked about the first two, attracting and training. Let's move to the next two.
Well, I think the third thing, and to be healthy, is the idea of sustaining. So just remembering that Sunday's always coming. That's a big phrase
Yep.
we use as worship leaders, especially if you're on staff at a church or you're the dedicated worship leader at that church. Every week, there's a Sunday coming. So you want to make things sustainable. And so the main way to do that is the big word rotation.
Yeah.
And so the basic thing I say about that is, make that a goal. If you don't have a rotation right now, make it a goal. It could be a goal that you can hit quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're like sitting there going, man, I don't even have a drummer right now, more or less 2 drummers.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you can always make it a goal at whatever level you're at. And the reason you want to do that is it's for the spirit and health of your team members. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you don't make rotation a goal, the risk you run is obviously burning people out, but also we can get territorial as people in our flesh. So
Yeah.
it's protecting team members from getting in that mode where I'm the drummer, this defines me, this is my identity, this is my spot, and I don't want anybody else to take it. So making that a clear goal with people, just keep, vision casting for that. I think that'll help a lot. So and that helps you sustain as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I like the word sustaining because actually it's interesting. I've heard this from several leaders, and I'd love to get your feedback on this, where I'm chatting with them and they're talking about how, they don't have rotation, right? Because they don't have enough people or whatever, but maybe they have, like, now they're starting to get a couple of new people, but they actually don't want to rotate because they're comfortable, right, with the people that they have, and they're afraid, like, well, if I rotate, it's going to be challenging for them as the leader, or it's not going to, work well or whatever. And so, yes, through the lens of sustaining, but are there any other like tools or tips or input that you would give somebody who says, like, I don't want to rotate because I'm scared that it's not going to go well, because obviously it's good for the long term, but they can't quite see that yet.
Right. The first thing I'd say to that is you are very right in thinking that it will be challenging. And know that anything great is challenging.
Yeah.
There's nothing, greatness doesn't come from ease, it comes from challenge. So know that, own it, be okay with that this is going to be harder to do this. And also, they're right in that if you don't have a rotation, your music might be better, especially initially, in the short term. Because think of what a band is. A band is, you think of U2, you think of Coldplay. My favorite band's The Killers. They don't have a rotation. It's just it's four guys that play together every day, and they are really, really good because they have great chemistry because they play together. But then I come back to this idea of, excuse my little pitch here, but it is more than a band. That's the whole idea.
Yeah.
We're the church. So getting that mindset of we're not a band, we are a worship team. We are ultimately the church. We just happen to do music.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. That's such a good word. So we hit the first three. What's the fourth one?
The last thing is the idea of empowering. So if you want to be healthy as a team, if you want to lead a healthy team or have a healthy team, you need to empower your team. So that means different things for each position. And that I even talk about that with the tech team, just all around asking yourself, how can I empower each individual on my team? And it will be different for each individual of how much they should be empowered. But just sitting there going, okay, how do I help them own this? And I heard in a workshop years ago the idea of ownership and avoiding territorialism, like what we've talked about. You want to teach your team members to own the team and not the position. So if I give them empowerment and really vision cast that well, I think they'll own the team. I think they'll own the idea of being the church and serving in that way. And I think they'll enjoy it. When we have buy-in and we have ownership, we just enjoy it more. We have a vested interest at that point. And so I think there's a lot of joy that can come with that. And then ultimately they'll be healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the ways that you empower people on your team who maybe they are struggling to feel like they are a part of the team, or they're not the super outgoing one, and they're not one of the lead singers, so they might feel like they're on the fringe or whatever. Like, how do you empower somebody to, own their part of the team, and then also to feel like they are a part of the team?
Yeah, I think there's three answers to that, I break it down to like vocalist, in band, and tech team. So with the vocalist, I look at each vocalist and ask myself, how can I maximize their worship leading ability? So, and each vocalist is different with that. So there's some vocalists that I need to help. When it comes to worship leading, it's really that talking part and that shepherding part. So how can I help them do that? Some vocalists, I'm going to have to give them what and when to say it. Yeah. Especially initially. Some vocalists, I just need to go, hey, shepherd us in this time, and just give them freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they have that gifting and ability. And then some vocalists, I'll just ask the straight up question, do you want to talk? And if they don't want to, that's okay. If their gifting is singing, and then that's okay. I'm the worship leader. I can talk. It's okay.
Yeah.
So just maximizing that. The band, just being open to their creative input. I always tell my musicians, come ready to and know the song, but also know that you can be creative. If you want to bring a twist to it, that's fine. Just make sure to know that if I don't like it, I'll let you know. So let's be open-handed with our creative ideas, but giving them that creative space. There's an empowering there. And then the tech team basically just find a balance of not reaching over people's shoulders too often, and let them create and run things. And again, that's different for each person and position, right? So
absolutely. Well, and I think with the way that you're talking about empowering, you're honoring them as musicians, as singers, as tech team members, you're honoring the time, the energy, the effort, the talent that they're bringing to the table, and therefore honoring them as a person. And that ultimately just is that beautiful cycle that invests in, in a healthy team. And I think when we empower, it makes me think of, you said you asked the question, right? Like, well, do you want to talk? And I think that's so valuable because I remember so just in the last few years, I was helping our church revive their youth worship team because they'd had one before and they, the leader graduated or, whatever, and it just kind of fell apart because there was nobody else that could do it. And now that my daughter's in youth group, I'm like, okay, I can do this, right? And so I was helping them revive it. And I remember that in my mind, I thought, well, I should probably, be the one to like set up the songs or do the prayers or whatever. Cause you're just thinking like, these are kids. But there was this check in my spirit that's like, no, I don't want them to need me, right? I want them to do this themselves, but asking the question of like, hey, do you want to pray? And these kids just blew me out of the water. Like, oh yeah, I'll do that. And then I'm like sobbing on the stage as they're praying these like most powerful, heartfelt, prayers that are just, so I think there's so much value in empowering people and just asking the question. So that's wonderful.
And like I said, they enjoy that. And when they feel empowered, their confidence rises.
Yeah.
They feel bought in. They're having a great time. They're being used to their potential and even challenged to maximize that potential. Then it's fun. And so it's like when, as we get better, if we get better and enjoy it, man, that leads to so much health on a worship team.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, as we near the end of our conversation today, I feel like we could keep going, but as we near the end, I would love if you would tell our listeners about your books, because I think they're such a valuable resource for worship teams today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, the first book is called More Than a Worship Leader, and that's kind of how it all started. That concept was birthed in me a long time ago. My dad would be my main mentor. He was a music minister my whole life. And one thing he taught me throughout all of it was that it's all about people. It's about loving people. Obviously, we want to glorify the Lord in all that we do. But when it comes to ministry, it's about people. It's about helping people and loving people. And that just stuck with me. And that stuck with me in the way I led worship. I wanted it to be engaging and not entertaining. It stuck with me on how I interacted with people throughout the week and off stage. And so that's always been a kind of a value system for me. And then I've always been a writer. So I think anybody who writes kind of dreams of writing a book. And I'm like, I'd love to write a book. That'd be cool. But I didn't know what to write about. But one day it hit me, this concept of More Than a Worship Leader. It started with a blog post I'd written. I was like, I think that could be a book, and fleshed it out. Started writing it. I think it was 2014. I think I started writing it, and then I finally finished it in 2016, 17. Self-published it in 17. And just has done really well on its own. It's just a little book that could. And haven't really done any advertising, but it's just done really well on Amazon. And
That's
it seems
awesome.
like it's really scratched the niche and helped worship leaders in this concept. And the idea of the book is being a more than a worship leader is about what you do, number one, off stage, just being in the lives of people, discipleship, being a part of the church family. And then the second part is on stage and just talking about the ideas of how we can love people, help people as we lead worship, engage with them, connect with them, not entertain them, not for our own vanity, all those things. And then the third part is being upstaged, which is the idea of empowering, the idea of giving up your spot eventually and being okay with that. So that's the first book as far as More Than a Worship Leader.
That's amazing. So then you have a second book that came out since then, More Than a Band. When did that one release?
Going way back when I first started leading worship, I've always had this desire to pour in my team, have some like devotional time. And in the 2000s, I was looking for stuff. The only thing I could find was these little booklets from Yancey.
I love her. Yes.
Yeah. And she's been on my podcast a couple times.
Yeah, same.
Yeah. And so I used her little booklets for youth worship. And to
Awesome.
just I needed something. It was either those, and I couldn't really find anything else out there like that. Or it was like, 150 to 200 page books that we just didn't have time
Right.
to expect our worship team to read and discuss, and especially with the rotation. And
Yeah.
I just need something simple, to do in rehearsal. And, fast forward years later, I write More Than a Worship Leader, and it starts taking off as far as sales. And I'm looking at it, and there's worship leaders buying it in bulk. And I'm starting to realize, oh my gosh, they're buying, because it has discussion questions after each
sure.
chapter. And I'm like, oh, they're actually buying this for their worship teams and using it in that manner. During the pandemic, I always had the idea of More Than a Band, and writing a discussion book for rehearsals or for retreats or whatever that was short enough, but yet deep enough to be able to have some meaningful discussions. So I wrote that during the pandemic, and I think I released it about a year later, 2021.
Okay.
And it's been really cool to see that start taking off, and see churches starting to buy that for their worship teams and go through it. It's got a similar kind of vibe to it, but for the team itself. And we've hit on a little bit with the idea of practice and rehearsal, and just make sure we have the right heart, the why of what we do. And so, yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. So, as we wrap up, can you tell everybody how to find the books, how to find you and your podcast?
Really simple, just GaryDurbin.com. Everything is there. I'd love for you to go check out my podcast, More Than a Worship Leader podcast. I put an episode out about every month, and your episode will be coming out this fall. I'm excited about that. So I'd love for you to check out that podcast. And both of my books are on Amazon, More Than a Worship Leader and More Than a Band. And I will give a quick plug. My wife just wrote her first book and put it out. It's a devotional book called Rest Rhythms,
awesome.
and her name is Jenny Durbin. So love for you all to check that out.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that. 2 authors in the house. That's cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Gary, thank you so much for taking time to bless our listeners and viewers today, those of you who are watching on YouTube. And I'm just really grateful for all the things that you're doing for the local church, for worship teams, and for sharing with our people today. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. All right, everybody, that wraps it up for another episode of the Overflow Worship Podcast. As always, we are grateful for you. We're praying for you. If you need anything, you know where to find us. And until next time, keep on thriving.